Chester and I met in 1975 here in Columbia, Missouri, and we've been domestic partners since then. And in 1979, we moved to San Francisco, California, and we lived there for 20 years.
Well, we all used to be just friends before David and Chester became David and Chester. Well, when they moved out to San Francisco, that was selfishly very terrible for me because they were like my best friends. But of course for them, that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. It allowed them to be who they are.
I was a self-employed attorney. I worked a lot of hours and very hard. I liked the work, but it's a very demanding profession. And Chester was working part-time and being a homemaker, basically. We went out to the restaurant on Friday evening. We took the bus, and there's a long city 3 or 4 block walk to the restaurant, and it was all fine. We get to the restaurant and we sit down and have a really nice meal and get up to leave, and I couldn't walk. That was in March of '93, and within about 6 months, I was diagnosed with MS. And I came home from the doctor's office and told Chester. I told him if he decided that that was too much for him to deal with, that he was free to leave, and I would understand that. And I meant it sincerely. And he said no, that he was going to stay and that he would take care of me.
But when David became ill, it became obvious that they could not stay there. You know, I went out there and visited them, and of course, if you know anything about San Francisco, number one, of course, it's all hills, and there's nowhere, no building you can go into without going up and down a lot of stairs. And I know for them both, it was really a hard decision that they had to make to come back here.
Within 3 years, I was in a 3-wheel scooter. And within another 3 years, I was rendered a quadriplegic, which is where I'm at right now, there's been no further deterioration for about 5 or 6 years.
I had volunteered for an organization called Seize the Day, and I volunteered to help people who needed assistance with activities of daily living or errands at the house, and that's how I met them, through the organization.
Chester's just a very special person. I don't know if I could do the same thing. I like to think that I could, but I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if Chester hadn't gotten me up out of bed, dressed, and here. Drove me here. He never drove. His whole life, he never wanted to. Hates to drive. And I was able to drive until about 6 years ago, and I voluntarily gave it up and taught Chester how to drive. So that was another thing he had to learn. And he learned, and he's got his license. I guess the only thing I could compare it to is maybe a parent with an infant, because in a lot of ways it's the same, only I'm a full-grown man, weigh 200 pounds, and I'm 6 feet tall, and I don't grow up.
David is a director of our chaplain program, which is a prayer program where chaplains, it's a pretty committed process where prayer chaplains go through a training, and they each year dedicate that year to being a chaplain, and many of them have been chaplains for many years. And after a couple of years, David just arose as a natural leader when our director, the current director, wanted to step down. So he's the one who's in charge of the monthly meetings. He makes sure all the scheduling happens. You know, it's hard to imagine what it might be like for both of them and the challenges that they face. And, you know, when I read, too, David's application for Chester, It just, and also just have observed them. You don't think about, you're just so used to this rock, Chester, who's always there, who we call before a meeting's gonna end, and Chester shows up to pick David up, and he comes in and he wraps him in a blanket. It's just something that just Chester does so naturally that it doesn't ever seem to me to be a sacrifice to him or a burden to him in any way. I never get a sense of complaint or irritation or exhaustion or anything.
Chester has devoted his entire life to David now. You know, that's what he does. His whole life is David. But he doesn't think about, I've devoted my whole life to David, I feel. You know, he still feels like I'm living with the person that I love above all else. And that's what I do.
Not too long ago, a few months ago, David was getting out of the van and going down the ramp, and I guess somehow when David goes down the ramp, you need to direct the wheelchair. He can't direct it because he needs to bend his head down to go down the ramp, so the head ray is off. And as he was going down the ramp, somehow or another, I wasn't there, but it went rather quickly, and there's a wall just about 2 feet from the end of the ramp, and David got catapulted out of the chair and hit his head on the wall, and then, you know, fell to the concrete garage.
I was not there, but I guess it was really bad, and he cracked his head open, and Chester really thought he was gonna die. And he called me on the phone. David was in the hospital already, but Chester called me on the phone and basically just said, I don't know what I would do if anything would ever happen to David. I never want anything to happen to David. And that was his only concern. You know, it was not, I know the thought that my life might be easier or my life would change. His life would the only thing he thought of was my life would change for the worse because David would be gone.
It's amazing what Chester does for David. And, you know, Chester's like that. That's his personality with the birds, with his dogs. He's just a very caring, compassionate person. He deserves this award. Probably 10 times over.
There's not a person in the world, sorry, that deserves it more than him. Everything he does every single day is geared towards making David comfortable and happy and to make less of the situation that he is in. You know, to make his life as normal as it could possibly be. And he is like an angel.
There's no words. I can't describe it. I really can't. But it comes from a very special place, and he's a special person. And he's so worthy of being recognized because, you know, when people look at me, I think they can sense the challenges that I face on some level. But to the outside world, Chester just looks like everybody else. They don't know what he's doing every day. I'm happy, I'm leading a fulfilled life. I do a lot of work at my church and at my home, and he's really given up his life in a lot of ways so that I could be happy and fulfilled.